We finished up, let's see, where did we finish up? We're in chapter 13. And where did we, oh yes, of course. We got to 13 and 24, didn't we? Somebody say, oh yeah, we did. You remember that passage? He who spares the rod hates his son, but he who beats him mercilessly is justified. Yeah. They may have said that when I was a kid. But he who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is careful to discipline him. And so I also had a parallel passage over in chapter 19 and verse 18. There it says, discipline your son, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing party to his death. Then we could go to chapter 22 in verse 4. Why do I want to go to 22 and verse 4? That's not right. 22 and verse 6. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. And then you can go to 22 and verse 15. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. Then you can go to 23, chapter 23, verses 13 and 14. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish him with the rod, he will not die. Punish him with the rod and save his soul from death. All right? So, those are just a sampling of how Proverbs talks about discipline with our children. And there's some important words that are connected to these passages. And I want to just begin with a huge disclaimer, because there have been those in the past who have taken this, or these passages, some of them, as justification for child abuse, basically. And they've done some terrible things to kids, and citing Bible passages, and citing them wrongly, I might add. Because nowhere in any of these passages does it justify abusing a child in any way, shape, or form. Actually, just the exact opposite. What are some driving words that you heard that clearly show that this is not the biblical justification for beating your children and abusing them? What are some key words that frame how discipline of our children should be? Care enough? So there has to be some kind of care, right? There needs to be love. Love needs to be about all of it. And when you're abusing children, there's not love there in that. What's another word? Okay. Discipline. Yeah. And training. And it's about training. It's about discipline. It's about care. One passage said, be careful too. It's about, does it mean that you can't punish your child though? Well, of course not. You can punish your children. The key is, how does punishment look? And what does it look like? Punishment may be a part of godly, loving discipline. There are some ways that you can punish a child without laying a hand on them that can traumatize them for their life. There are adults who can use their words in such a way as that they're abusive. Our words are. And so there are a lot of ways that you can abuse children. But all these passages, one thing they have in connection with one another is love. Loving discipline. Loving training. Careful. concern, looking to their future. You know, the one passage is, don't be a willing party to his or her death. You see, I'm going to share with you what I think one of the worst, and I'm not saying the worst, but one method of child abuse today that is very, very harmful for not only a child, but society as a whole, is parents not using and employing their God-given authority in that child's life. Not disciplining their children. And I've seen it firsthand. All over. And I know that the first thing people think of when they think of discipline is spanking. Spanking is so absolutely limited in its effectiveness. And I don't think that proper spanking is prohibited in the Bible at all. Improper spanking and using any kind of switch or belt or anything that's going to actually leave a mark on a child is not supported in biblical teaching. So everything needs to be godly. But here's one of the more important, I think, neglects today is parents neglecting to discipline their children. And neglecting to be that first authority figure in a child's life. So here's how it kind of plays out. There's no discipline. There's no authority in a child's life. There's no boundaries given to them. So if they don't have to listen to you, and so when they go to school, why do they need to listen to the teachers? Why do they need to listen to the principal? Why do they need to listen to a police officer or anyone else in authority? Because if they don't have to listen to you, that's going to transfer over. And to make it even worse, we probably all experience this. A child misbehaves, say at school, and bucks the authority, bucks the rules, and the parents come into the school and support that. Support the child. Now, some of us old-timers, you've heard it said, and maybe even some of the younger ones here, when I got in trouble at school because I broke the rules, and I got punished at school, I got punished at home too. And I knew full well when I was rebelling and doing things like that, I knew I'd get punished for it, And so had there been no parameters, who knows what else I would have done. I don't know. But I think it's a terrible form of child abuse in the sense that kids are not shown that there are those in authority, there are rules that have to be followed, and there are things that we need to do to get disciplined in this world if we're going to make it in this world. And the first place I really began to respond to discipline in the biblical sense that they're using it here was when I joined the Air Force. And Vera and I can share a wonderful story about Tommy because he's not in the class here, our middle son. God is so good, Here was a kid as he was turning 16, 17, 18, who was very much like his father's was, And so we had some challenging time. He didn't want to follow the rules, and we kept working on him. And especially his failure to respect his mom and basically women in general. So, I'm about ready to put the kid out of the house. I'm on the verge. I knew that was going to be tough because that's a tough one. So what does he do? Oh, God is so good. He says, I'm joining the Air Force. I'm joining the Air Force. Too many rules here at this house. I'm joining the Air Force. So he joins the Air Force, and the best thing that happened was what, Vera May? When he joined the Air Force, he got another mama. He got a woman training instructor. Oh, God made that one happen. And he thought his mom was so bad with rules. Oh, this lady rode him like a horse. I mean, she wore him out. How many days was it when he called and said, I get it, Mom, I want to come home? About 2 days. About 2 days. So that was good, and so it really helped him a lot too. But it's not easy to do these things. It's a lot easier to be, the pal and than to be the parent. I remember sitting Tommy down and saying, "No, you're not going to watch this movie." "Why not, Dad? Everybody else is watching that movie." "No, you're not going to watch that movie." And so it's not always easy. And so the rod, we got to get to the rod. What is this rod that we should not spare? Is it a stick that we just go along and see our kid misbehaving and just whack them with it? No, that's not what it is. And I love in Kenya, even though Kenyans are not the most perfect parents, but they take this rod thing, and you see anyone in authority, they all have a small stick. And I first saw this employed at a grade school in Kenya, and this lady had a little schoolhouse. It basically was a mud hut with a tin roof and some wooden benches in it. And she had about, I called them her little chicks, about 25, 30 of these kids. And they were all younger elementary kids. They all put them in one room, so I don't know. They were from 6 years old to 12, right in there. And everywhere she went, she had that little stick. She never hit a single kid, but she would just point that stick and just, "Come on over here, go over here, go over here, go over here." And they did it. They did it. All these little kids were corralled. And when she wanted them quiet, she just tapped that stick, And have any of you volunteered in our classroom, our lunchrooms at an elementary school? Anybody ever do that? You've done it? You've done it? Can you even talk in those rooms? The noise is so loud. Everybody's all talking at the same time. It's not that way in Kenyan lunchrooms. You can talk. Kids are talking very softly, It's different culture right now. I don't remember. Here's an area where I'm really biased, because when I was a kid, I don't remember how it was in my lunchroom. Vera, how about you? I don't remember it being that loud. But was it? Huh? I remember one time I was goofing off in lunch. Go figure, We had a principal. His name was Mr. What was Mr. A's name? Amerzowicz. That's what it was. Amerzowicz. But we all called him Mr. A. Well, Mr. A was missing an arm. So he had one of those mechanical arms with the pinchers on them. All right? And I was goofing off, and all of a sudden I got those pinchers on my ear. And he pulled me up by my ear, and I went down to the office. So obviously there was something you could do in lunchroom when I was a kid that was not right. I was in 6th, 7th grade at the time. But another example was when we went to Sauter Village. To give you an example of the rod of correction. There was a guy there who had 2 oxen. You guys seen oxen? I mean, these things are huge. They're like a ton each. These things, these big old oxen, right? About 2,000-pound oxen, somewhere in that neighborhood. Beasts of burden. I mean, they can pull a house, And so this guy had these 2 oxen. They were yoked up. He had this little bitty stick. And he would tap one on his haunch there, and he'd say, "Gee," and he'd go this way, and he'd go, "Ha," and he'd go this way, and he could tap them another, and he said something else, they'd back up, and he'd tap them again, and they could go forward. He said something, they'd go forward. But that little stick was all he had for correcting and directing these huge beasts. So the rod of correction is a rod of authority. It's to express your authority. Matter of fact, that was one thing I wanted to have before I left Kenya. I said, I got to get one of these sticks, because especially the chiefs, they had a really nice one. It was polished and black and had silver tips on each end. And so before I left, they finally gave me one, because you got one of those. You're a chief, assistant chief, a teacher. You're someone in authority. And that's what people just recognize, that you had this rod of authority. Okay, not to beat people with, but that doesn't mean some people wouldn't use it in an incorrect manner, But that's not what it's about. It's about my authority. And whoever spares the rod, whoever spares this authority in their child's life, Proverbs says you hate them. So I think that I'm pretty much spot on, biblically speaking, when I say this is a crisis in families when the parents will fail to exercise their authority in their child's life in a loving, careful, godly way. But there comes a time to say no. Our kids need to hear no. And we don't have to give them a justification, because sometimes they don't get it. I know Tommy, he didn't get it. It doesn't matter if you get it. You just need to obey it. That's all. Trust that I love you and just do it. But he who loves him is careful to discipline him. And so matter of fact, when we were in Arkansas, Russell and I don't know if Tommy did Lance to lead us, but Russell did. And it was really cool because they taught different forms of discipline. For instance, how do your kids get up in the morning? Do you have to go wake them up? Do you have to go, check on them 6 or 7 times to get them out of the bed? Or have they been trained early, disciplined, to set an alarm clock? Get yourself out of bed. There comes a point in time in a child's life where get yourself out of bed. You get your own alarm clock. How many of your children have their own checking account? At what point in time do they get their own checking account? I was quite an independent kid myself. And it came through necessity because my mom and dad divorced when I was really young. And so, and I didn't even think about it until recently here. When I was in the 4th grade living in Ann Arbor, my mom was a single mom. And I was working a little job at this, they had all these offices at the strip mall. And I would take my $1 or $2 and I went and opened up my own account at Ann Arbor Bank when I was in the 4th grade on my own. But at what point do you have your kids get their own accounts, get them a checking account, a savings account, start teaching them those things? At what point do they make their own car payment? Do they make their own insurance payment on their car, and on and on and on? So do we prepare them for future life? At one point, and by the way, no one, what says in class here, especially on personal nature, do not repeat this, but because my son will be really mad with me, but maybe not too much. He knows I like to use him as an illustration. But one thing he didn't like to do was clean his room. His mom was always on him, clean his room, clean his room, clean the room. That room was a pig pen. So she got tired, so she hired Amy to clean Tommy's room. Know what? Huh? Well, yeah. Well, Tommy was to pay for it. And another thing was when all our kids were told, all of them, when you graduate from high school, you get a little break. High school to that fall. Choices start then. But until then, sleep in every day till noon, who cares? But come September, you're either enrolled full-time in college, you have a job. If you're enrolled full-time in college, you can stay here for no cost. We'll feed you, we'll do your wash, no cost. But if you choose not to enter into college full-time, then you will have a job and you will begin to pay rent. So, of course, you know what Tommy did. He's too much like his dad. He chose to do nothing. But he did get a job, and we charged him rent. So rent was due at the end of the month. He didn't pay. So what did he get? He got a late fee, right? He's like, what's this, a late fee? I said, well, I'll tell you what, T. I have a storage shed over here at Brady's, and I was 1 day late with my payment. And they charged me a late fee. That's real life. And this is real life for you. You got a late fee. He didn't like it. Of course, who does? But discipline. Teach them how to live without you. We as parents need to grow up our children so that they can live a godly life without us. We don't need them to be dependent on us their whole life. Right? And that's what these passages are teaching us. And they're teaching us to teach our children how to love God, how to live a prudent life, how to live a life in which they can live without us as parents, how they can fit within society in a supporting way, and so on. So, if you love your child, you will discipline them. You will exercise your authority in their lives. And let me go to 19 as well, and verse 18. Discipline your son and your daughters, for that matter, for in that there is hope. See, who was it? Dobson did a wonderful series of lessons and made them available on tape, and it was specifically directed towards boys and how to raise boys, and how to deal with kids. There's some huge statistics about blacks who are in prison as a culture, and in a huge percentage of those blacks who are in prison, it was like 98% had no father figure in the home. None. No fatherly discipline for those children. Anyhow, there's a huge, unmistakable correlation between the lack of discipline by a father in those boys' lives that led to their incarceration and various types of crimes and so on. Statistically, it was a slam dunk. And that's what this passage is talking about. And of course the other one that talks about being a willing party to his death. And so, parents, especially dads, in relationship to their children, you want them to have hope for the future and a future life. Do not be a willing party to his death. You need to be there and be that disciplinarian that you need to be. So if you want to look at more detailed statistics in regards to Dr. Dobson's study on this, and as a culture, what that's doing, the absence of fathers in the home, in the black culture, you can look at what's the name of that family? What's it called? Focus on the Family. Thank you very much. Focus on the Family in Colorado, Dr. Dobson, and he's written a wonderful book in that study. So it's just hugely important. So you love your children? Discipline them. Discipline them. I like the Living Bible. And matter of fact, I got a couple of different translations that help us flesh this out a little bit more. So 1324 in the New Century Version says, if you do not punish your children, you don't love them. But if you love your children, you will correct them. Okay? The Living Bible puts it this way, if you refuse to discipline your son, it proves you don't love him. For if you love him, you will be prompt to punish him. The Living Bible in 1918 says, discipline your son in his early years while there's still hope. If you don't, you'll ruin his life. So, Proverbs talks very, very specifically on how to deal with our kids. Well, let's move on to chapter 14. I got a little bit of time left. 14 verse 2, he whose walk is upright fears the Lord, but he whose ways are devious despise him. So what does it mean to walk upright? He whose walk is upright. Do we have some other translations of 14 and verse 2? What does it mean to walk the upright life? Lori, what does the NLT say? Okay, so instead of walk upright, it says walk the right path. Okay, Vera, the CEV? Yeah, verse 2. Okay, live good lives. Okay. Cheryl, how about the King James? Oh, uprightness. Okay. Anybody else got another translation for that? So you kind of get a flavor for how the translators are trying to, capture that phrase. What does it mean to walk upright, to walk on the right path, to live right, to obey and honor God, okay, and honor His Word. And so in other words, as best we can, live a life that's in harmony with the will and the way of God, and which is just another way of talking about wise living. We know that wise living, wisdom, is we take the knowledge that God has given us, the knowledge of His Word, and when we translate that into how we live life, that is the right path. That is upright. That is wise living. But he whose ways are devious. Devious is a derivative of deviate. So if we deviate from God's ways and we're trying to be sneaky here and there and depart from that path and depart from God's will and His ways, we despise God when we do that. So that's the upright walk. And it's differing in values. And as a matter of fact, you could utilize this particular passage and begin to just talk about worldview. You have a worldview where God is in heaven, and He is to be honored and to be worshiped and to be obeyed, or you and I are God. And, we do what we all generally agree we like to do. That's devious, and it despises God. I mean, it basically comes down to either you believe God and you obey Him, or you do your own thing. And 14 in verse 2 is talking directly to that. And you ask yourself, how can people do certain things today? It's because they are not walking upright. They are not living a life that honors God and obeys Him. Simple. Verse 10. Each heart knows its own bitterness, and no one else can share its joy. You ever been there? It's almost virtually impossible for others to experience what you're experiencing, whether it be joy or whether it be sorrow. The proverb writer is saying, only you really know what you are going through. But it doesn't stop us from trying to share it, does it? Both our joy and our sorrows. And sometimes we get a little bit mixed because people don't share in with that. And maybe you've been there. And I guess this proverb should encourage you, don't go there. Don't go there and be upset because they don't really understand the depth of your sorrow or the height of your joy. You know. And God knows. And we can do our best we can to be empathetic with people, but really no one knows what we're going through other than ourselves. Verse 12, there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. And then over in 16:25 it says the exact same thing. Interesting. So it seems right. It seems right. This seems like the right thing to do. But it ends up in death. And I just have a question here. And I like to see what you guys think. Why does it seem right? Why does this seem right? Because it might be the easy way to go, okay? Instead of the hard way to go? Mm-hmm. That's the first thing come to mind for me. I like the easy thing too, but it's like, I want it to be this way. And so I begin to delude myself that this has got to be the right, but it ends up in destruction. But I wanted it so bad. Yeah. I think that's what I got out of it as well. The other thing is verse 16. A wise man fears the Lord and shuns evil, but a fool is a hothead and reckless. Wise man fears the Lord, respects the Lord, reveres the Lord. Again, getting back to submitting to the Lord and stays away from evil. But a fool, you've seen hot-headed, reckless people. They're a fool. Doesn't mean they have low intelligence. Doesn't mean they don't have knowledge. It means they don't utilize God's knowledge, God's word, and God's values, but their own in life. And the proverb would say that person is a fool. And man, I had a guy like this when I was living in South Dakota. I was working. I was in the Air Force, and he'd get mad, and he would throw tools, and Proverbs would say, don't spend time around that person. Get some space from that person. Okay, verse 20. The poor are shunned even by their neighbors, but the rich have many friends. Now, I got a question for y'all. Is that right? By the way, this is a trick question. This is a trick question. Is that right? The poor are shunned even by their neighbors, but the rich have many friends. This is a great example of the nature of Proverbs, okay? And so this is really a trick question that I'm giving you, and especially the way that I'm framing it. Is this right? And with that set up, no one dares to jump in. Crickets, crickets. Is it right? Poor are shunned by their neighbors, and the rich have many friends. Is that right? Come on, somebody say no. Yes, it is right. Okay, say it again. Say it's right. No, it's wrong. See, it all depends how you take right. Because Peter's kind of cutting through it by using the word true. Is this a reality? And a generic reality? Because not every neighbor despises the poor, But it's a general truth. And Proverbs oftentimes, not saying this is right, a right thing to be doing, that it's right for you to shun your poor neighbor or to be pals with the rich. It's not saying that's what we ought to be doing, but it's a reflection of the reality. This is what people have a tendency to do. They don't want anything to do with their poor neighbor, but man, everybody wants to know Bill Gates or whoever. Bose now is the guy, right? The Amazon guy, richest guy in America. Yeah, everybody wants to be a pal with him. Why do we want to be a pal with him? Why do people want to be pals with the rich? They'll give us some, maybe. They got lots. Maybe they'll share some with us, right? So everybody wants to be a pal with the rich. And so it's not saying that it's the correct thing to do. It's the reality. It's Pete would say, the truth. And so in it, it ought to get us to be thinking too, as to how should we be. Verse 21, he who despises his neighbor sins, but blessed is he who is kind to the needy. So it presents the reality on the ground. We, by human nature, if we don't guard ourselves, will despise our poor neighbor and be pals to the rich, when we should not be despising our neighbor or shunning them, but helping them. Blessed is he who is kind to the needy. That's what we should be doing. Okay? So pretty neat. Proverbs you'll see often, and someone will cite a proverb and say, see, no. It's not necessarily the right thing to do, but it is right in that that's a reality of what's going on the ground. Okay? One more thing, and then we'll finish. Verse 30, and I love this one. It's gonna tie right into the sermon. What a great finish here. Okay? A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Hopefully you don't envy anybody or anything, because it leads to this rotting of the bones. Literally rot our bones? I don't know about that. But it does make us yucky inside. Peace is worth more than anything. To truly be at peace at heart. Peace with what you have. Peace with who you are. Peace with others. Do you have peace? And by the way, doesn't the Bible talk about marital relationship and peace? Better to live on the corner of a roof house than with a nagging wife, right? Right? And by the way, in all fairness, I think you can flip it, can't you? Right? You can flip it. All right, that's enough for one day. Thank you very much. We'll pick up. Where am I going to pick up next week? Oh, chapter 15 and verse 1. You need to practice 15 and verse 1 all week.